in the spring, we saw these major mobilizations across US campuses, across Canadian campuses as well, in support of Palestinian liberation. And of course, university and political authorities and state and law enforcement responded with an incredible amount of repression and violence against students. And now, as a new academic year begins, these same universities, I mean, even system-wide, like the University of California as a system, has engaged in imposing draconian rules aimed at punishing and preventing student protests against the American-backed genocide in Gaza. NYU, one of the most vaunted bastions of progressive free speech and thought and scholarship, has just determined that Zionism is now a protected trait, and so any criticism of Zionism is going to be met with severe repression and academic punishment. Where does this stand? Like, what do you think is the significance of the campus movement and the crackdown in terms of the educational institutions being, a locus for real direct engagement with power? With I mean, you've been at the center of it, but what are you seeing now in terms of campuses as the Israeli lobby has called it, a battleground?
Mm. It was always that way, but now it's all come to a head, and you know there always comes a point in the political process in the United States where if things start getting serious and picking up in intensity, that the administrative classes, the managerial classes, the cops, the politicos, and so forth drop all of their pretenses of diversity and inclusion and free speech and just bring the hammer down. And we're seeing that happen now. And so the student movements, and they require a lot of courage, a lot of creativity, a lot of imagination. I don't think that people should be standing on the sidelines and policing how they speak and jeering at them as being unrealistic, because in a sense that if there's any democratic impulse anywhere in the political landscape in the United States, it's actually coming out of these communities. These are important forms of political participation. And part of the problem is definitional or categorical. People are conditioned in the United States, Canada as well, to understand voting and electoralism as the cardinal forms of political participation. But these are forms of political participation also. Practicing BDS is a form of political participation. Defending students and community members from oppression is a form of political participation, and so forth. Important forms of political participation, I should add. But what people need to do at this point, yes, they need to stand in solidarity with the students and the community members and the faculty members who are being beaten and expelled and repressed in other ways, but also continue to analyze the mythological foundations of the modern corporate university, as a place of learning, as a place where ideas are exchanged, as a place of generosity and abundance. We're seeing now very clearly they're not trying to hide it at all anymore, that they are very blunt instruments of the ruling class, and it doesn't even take much agitation or provocation for them to sort of drop the pretense and go full out fascist with the billy clubs. It has happened at different points in the history of the modern university, and this is one of the more notable examples where the university, right, and its investors, its stakeholders, as it were, are telling us exactly who they are and whose side they're on.
Stephen, you said this is sort of one of those historic points, and people have been saying you have to go back to the late 1960s or the early 70s, the Vietnam era, for this kind of violence against students on campuses in the United States. why this? Why is the crackdown? And we all know that there's always been what we call a Palestine exception to free speech, that you can protest or advocate all sorts of things on American campuses, and people may disagree with you, but you're not going to be fired, you're not going to be punished. I mean, we saw in your case back in 2014, even at the University of Illinois, I covered this very closely, that same university had a history of vigorously defending the free speech rights of an open white supremacist on that campus, and saying, well, we may not agree with him, but those are his views. Whereas you were fired for speaking out against the massacre of children by Israel. So we know that it's all, all the lofty talk about academic freedom and is BS. But why do you think the repression is so? What is it about this moment that is making them take the mask off?
I've said a bunch of times and over the years, and I think if people sometimes, even if they want to believe me, they think I'm exaggerating or being hyperbolic. But to me, it's clear as day now. Better to be a Nazi or a sexual predator than an anti-Zionist on campus. You're more likely to to avoid being fired, first of all, or even to move up the ranks in a lot of cases. It's infuriating, it's frustrating, but again, this is the reality we need to confront. This is no time to be idealizing the campus and the system of higher education in the United States. This is the time where we need to situate it as part of the ruling class process, right, of extraction, hegemony, repression, etc. Yes, there are a lot of ideological Zionists, right, as donors, right, as upper administrators, as faculty, as students, and so they can exert a sort of pressure, and so the university is going to look to protect its interests first, their interests first. But I think it's more than that. We probably ought to think about the ways that Palestine and what you might call pro-Palestine activism or anti-Zionist activism has historically appended itself to a number of radical concerns that university stakeholders, that basically terrify university stakeholders, and that they see as anathema and as hostile to their interests and to the interests of the institution. Anti-capitalism, anti-racism, anti-militarism, anti-imperialism. This isn't to say that everybody who is anti-Zionist is also anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist, but the issue of Palestine historically has appended itself to these, to these issues that sort of run alongside it. Black radical thought, anti-racism, right? The Palestine is associated with those things. So in part, I would say that it's the power of Zionist communities within and on the outside of these institutions, invested in these institutions. And on the other hand, it's that they see any sort of pro-Palestine effort as damaging on potentially damaging on a variety of fronts, because pro-Palestine activism goes after their investments, right? It goes after their endowments. It goes after a lot of their relationships with the arms industry and other unsavory elements both inside and outside of the United States. So it is Palestine, but it's not just Palestine. It's what Palestine represents in addition to the physical geography of Palestine itself.
So just thinking, that there's a lot of educators and students, people, academics who watch this live stream. And I wonder, Steven, thinking a decade after your experience, and you spent a few years away from academia, and that's what you talk about in your new memoir, An Honest Living. And now you're back at a university. You're at the American University in Cairo, which is on the one hand an American university, on the other hand in Cairo. So that's an interesting. So it is part of the empire, but at the same time, it's in a slightly different context. So my question is, do you have any thoughts or advice for other educators, people in academia, about how you can hold a moral position, how you can be true to your principles and still exist and function within these thoroughly corrupt and compromised institutions? Or is it impossible?
I have kind of what might be called an existential take on it that folks might find a little bit too abstract, but I've, over the past 10 years, I've lived what you might call an interesting life. I had an interesting, professional career. I bounced around different places around the world. I was out of academia for 5 years, but I'd really emphasize, to those academics and students who, are concerned with Palestinian life and Palestinian liberation and Black liberation and Native American liberation and the liberation of the oppressed in general, right? The recovery of the dispossessed, any issue having to do with justice, that of course there's a great chance that you're going to run into trouble, but you whatever happens, you have to live with yourself. And over these past 10 years, I've been able to live with myself. And that's not a material resource, but you could say it's an intellectual resource and a spiritual resource, and one that I've been tremendously glad to have access to, that it helped me get through whatever struggles I faced, knowing that I didn't sell out. I made plenty of mistakes. I did some stupid things, but I held firm to a central set of principles, and I'm glad that I did, because not being able to live with myself, I think would have made it really impossible to survive through all of the ups and downs. So figure out, strategy aside, figure out what your core principles are, what your red lines are, if they were, and determine that no matter what they try to do to you, that you're not going to cross them, and that you're going to face down and survive whatever they might try to do with you, as difficult as it is. And without that sense of steadfastness, you're going to put yourself in a position where you get the same punishment, and you sold out at the same time. So you're going to end up with nothing. You're going to end up in the Manouche Shafik situation, right? Or the Claudine Gay situation, right?
Yeah,
and
so just
Manouche
Shafik is the, for those who don't know, she is the president of was the president of Columbia University. Her background is she's like came from the UK. She's Egyptian, Egyptian. She's Egyptian born, lived in the UK, was ennobled in the UK. I understand she's, has a title of nobility. And she was brought to Columbia to do the dirty work. And of course, at the same time celebrated for being the first Arab woman to head, a major, Columbia anyway, if not a major Ivy League or whatever it is. But she did everything that the donors and the rulers wanted, up to and including calling in the police to beat up and arrest her own students. And then once she did the dirty work, they discarded her completely. So that's who you mean. And Claudine Gay it's a similar story. She was the president of Harvard, and also celebrated for diversity because she was a Black woman brought in to do the dirty work of the ruling class as president of Harvard.
Yeah, it doesn't pay off. I mean, as soon as stuff started popping off at Columbia, I said, okay, Shafiq is not going to last. As soon as she doesn't. But I don't think anybody should feel sorry. Like, when the administrators in Illinois, 10 years ago, the chancellor and the provost lost their jobs and the fallout of my firing. And, I was happy that they, that they lost their justice. It wasn't really a punishment because they get compensated. They get the golden parachute. Then they end up getting very lucrative consulting jobs. So Shafiq is going to be fine. Gay is going to be fine. But you're not going to be fine. I'm talking about regular faculty members, student activists, and all. You're not going to be fine. Nobody's going to be there to give you a golden parachute or to pick you up. Think about who you're fighting for and who you're fighting with, and the people in Palestine. Despite it all, despite it, incalculable hardship and suffering, they're standing tall. They're not giving up. They're refusing to concede, and we have to move forward in that same spirit. And I know I'm speaking again in abstractions, but I think those abstractions are important because you're going to leave an idea behind and a legacy behind from your activism, from your political work, and it needs to be one that's there for others to latch onto and build from.
Hmm.
Just a note on Shafiq, she already landed a job, a high-profile job with the new Labour government in the United Kingdom. So she is getting rewarded for her services to Israel.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
I mean, just, thinking about the way that U.S. academia portrays Palestinian students on their own campuses, and the way that they have ignored Palestinian students in other universities in Gaza. I mean, Israel has destroyed every single university and college, community college in Gaza, hundreds of schools. I see on Twitter all the time of med students taking their boards inside a tent for displaced people, where they can catch like maybe 1 bar of internet signal. Hundreds. I mean, just the fact that so many professors and academics, our dear friend Rafat, for example, at the Islamic University of Gaza, have been assassinated, have watched their universities be blown up by Israeli soldiers. What does that mean for Palestinians for whom education has always been supremely important? I know you've talked a lot about that in your own life, and how you think people around the world, especially in academia, should be relating to the reality of academia in Palestine and Gaza in particular.
Yeah, the education system in all of Palestine has been extremely important historically and contemporaneously. It's been extremely important in Gaza over the decades. And so just like with the hospitals, the Zionist entity targets it on purpose. So it's not just about exterminating and displacing people. It's about weakening their society and making sure that it makes it all the more difficult for them to build back, right? Because expertise is generated in these universities, ideas, intellectual traditions, and so forth. It's I don't know. I don't have the words for it. I think about dearest Rafat and all the other students and faculty, who have suffered, who have been killed, who are suffering right now, and there are just no words. And I really don't understand. This is, I hope, a bridge to your other question about observers, academic observers around the world. I don't know how they can go on. Let me just put it this way: things in academic culture, the way we understand certain concepts needs to change, and it needs to change permanently. I mean, it was always the case, but the genocide has made it clear. Let me give you an example. The AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, it's kind of the main academic freedom group out there. It kind of sets the terms of academic freedom and kind of monitors it, intervenes where necessary. just overturned a longstanding policy against academic boycotts. So in other words, the AAUP now allows for academic boycotts. They don't see it as a problem anymore. This is a welcome move. I was happy to see them do it because they were really, really against it. For the longest time, ever since BDS became a thing about 20 years ago. And a lot of academics, there were some people I was surprised to see on the list signed a letter, and then a lot of people I wasn't surprised, condemning the AAUP on the grounds that academic freedom is sacrosanct. And so I get to thinking, it's like, okay, well, obviously these signatories have shit politics, right? That's why they're signing. They're signing it not out of any principle, because they're Zionists. Okay, it's simple enough, right? Nobody's going around playing make believe anymore. Nobody has the time or energy for that, that kind of nonsense. But then I started thinking, well, in a material sense, in relation to what's happening in Gaza, in all of Palestine, right? What does it mean to make an effort to protect this idea called academic freedom over the actual human beings who are being slaughtered? Our colleagues, our students, our collaborators in many cases. What does it mean? What is academic freedom is? What is it? Right? Okay, it's a philosophical question. It's a civil liberty, but it's not something. It's not something I can hold. It's not something I can eat. It's not something that keeps me warm. It's not something that intervenes in the destruction of an entire nation. What is it? I quite like academic freedom. I think it's important. I would like to see it implemented. Certainly, all of the universities in the United States need a good dose of it, vis-a-vis what they're doing to Palestinians and protesters of all cultural and ethnic backgrounds. But when it comes to stopping a genocide and intervening in a genocide, why would anybody want to prioritize these abstract civil libertarian things in the West? Of course, we have to use whatever means are at our disposal to stop the genocide. Is academic boycott going to stop the genocide? No, but it's a tactic at our disposal, one among many, and we have to use it. Right? To me, a lot of, besides the bad politics that go into people lionizing these notions of civil liberty, academic free speech, etc. It's in the end we have to stop fucking genocide. We have to intervene, right? And I'm not going to prioritize these flights of fancy in the West, these mythologies, right, over anything, right, that is going to even minimally help, right, in any kind of intervention to stop this Zionist slaughter. That's what needs to take precedent now, not your privileges at a tenured academic at a Research One institution. These, in other words, I'm ranking things in terms of importance, and stopping genocide goes to the top of the list. Right, your comforts, your creature comforts, and your civil liberties as a professional. Not that academic boycott messes with any of those things, mind you. Right, they're somewhere on down. They're somewhere on down the list. It just has to be that way.
And then, of course, there's this perverse discourse in American and British and Canadian and other Western universities that the thing that has to be prioritized is not stopping the genocide, is not stopping the destruction of universities and educational institutions in Gaza, which aren't more or less important than hospitals and houses or mosques or churches, but should be relevant to an academic institution. So none of that is as important as protecting the feelings of students on American or British or Canadian campuses. So then we get into this discourse about, oh, well, all these protests about Palestine, they hurt the feelings of Zionist students, and we need to prioritize their feelings of safety. And of course, they don't mean any of this. I mean, you can't engage with this in any good faith sense because they don't, it's not anyone's feelings they care about. This is just another cynical, manipulative tactic to shut down the discussion. And it's so plain now. It's all out in the open, as you said.
Yeah, it's over with now. I mean, it's not over. What I mean to say is that there's a thick red line now, right? You're on the anti-genocide side of it, or you're on the other side. And if you're on the anti-genocide part of the line, then everything else is a whole lot of noise. And I've been glad to see that fewer and fewer people entertaining that crap about we're hurting our feelings, and we don't feel safe, and it's incredible. We see what's going on. We see it in our feeds all the time, and to create a culture where we're not even able to condemn these horrors. It's grotesque. I don't know. I don't have the language for it, but I'm glad that people are caring less and less about appearance. We shouldn't care. We can't control, right, how our oppressor whines and complains. We can't control how administrators and management characterize our politics and our activities, but we can control how we are affected and influenced by this outside noise. And so we have to do our best to ignore it, disregard it, or treat it with the contempt that it deserves.
Well said. Ali mentioned, we just have a couple minutes left, but Ali mentioned at the beginning your book, An Honest Living, which came out, I believe, in February. But then this came in the mail to my house a few days ago. Your first novel. Talk about your novel. Talk about the art of of writing, of imagining, of creating a fictional story in this moment of like absolutely unimaginable um horrors. And yeah, just talk to us a little bit about your novel, Daughter, Son, Assassin.
Oh, well, thank you, Nora, and I'm flattered that you purchased it or you got hold of it, whatever, and I
We're
hope you
big
will like
fans of Steven Salaita in our house.
well, I hope the novel won't change that. You know, I recently did a talk at AUC about what we're doing as literary critics, in a time of genocide. And it came to me when I sat down to write it that we're always doing this sort of thing in a time of horror. Certainly this is a heightened period of horror, but there's always something horrible going on. And in a way, I think of it as synchronous with the production and the consumption of art. We see the tradition of art, visual art, audio art, literary art in Palestine, ever since 1900 and before, is just phenomenal. We we're a society that manages, despite all the horror and trauma, or maybe in part because of the horror and trauma, to produce so many beautiful things. And this novel was written a long time ago. It was just published recently, but it was written a long time ago. During kind of a similar but a different political moment, because there's always a political moment in Palestine. Right? There's always a moment of violence. The violence has been continuous, and we're aware of the violence. So whenever we produce any kind of art, and in this I include journalism and nonfiction of the sort that Ali and everybody else does at Electronic Intifada, and does very well, I should say. We're always sort of producing our work, let's say, right? Our work in the backdrop of this continuous violence. So I always think of it as having a dialectical relationship with politics. And so when you read the novel, you'll see that it's not about Palestine per se, but Palestine is omnipresent. And that's how Palestine, I think, functions for a lot of us inside and outside of the nation. That it's It's what Toni Morrison would have called the the absent presence. Even when it's not there, it's there. Even when we're not thinking about it, we're thinking about it, right? It's always sort of influencing us. And so, the novel is very directly political in some ways and very abstract in others. But in a lot of ways, it's really just exploring in a different medium a lot of the things that we're talking about now, how to survive and make do in a world that's filled with so much hardship and violence.
Hmm.
Mm.
I was surprised to learn that you're a writer of fiction, and I'm excited to read it. And it's just more evidence of how productive you are as a thinker, as a writer, and as someone who I know I've learned a lot from and continue to learn from over the years. And I have to say, you've often been ahead of us in terms of saying. I think I do, or I like to think that I do this. I say the things that people aren't always ready to hear, and so people get mad at you a lot of the time because they say, "Oh, Ali, you're being too harsh, you're being too hyperbolic," as you said, or But I think you do that even more, and it is an incredibly valuable function and role that people need to play. And I often will say, things you've said over the years. Oh, is Stephen going a little bit too far with that? And then, very sadly, time proves you right, because often what you're telling us is not necessarily good news, but it's the truth. And you are a truth teller, Stephen.
Wow, I really I don't deserve those accolades. I would direct them to you, but thank you. That means a lot to me. That's extremely kind of you to say, and I I wish I didn't have to be so skeptical, let's say, but just a lot of experience observing, and it's pretty easy to see where people end up, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, I wish we could spend more time with you today, but will you come back soon? And I feel like we only touched on some of these things, and we're very grateful for your time, and I hope we can welcome you back soon. In the meantime, where can people check out some of your work and writing? Of course, people should look for your books wherever they buy books, but where else can people find your work if they want to learn more?
Just stevesalaita.com is where I publish very irregularly my essays. Commonnotions.org. It's a wonderful independent press out of Philadelphia and Brooklyn that published the novel, and Fordham University Press for the memoir, if anybody is interested.
Yeah, and that's an honest living. Thank you so much, Stephen. We really appreciate it, and we hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely.
I thank you very much.
All
Thanks,
right.
Steve.
Take care.
Take care.